In this video here I am going to show you how to information into room database. So here I am going to use fragments for each database operations. So now here I am going to add a home fragment. So right click the application folder and create a new fragment. Here I name it as home fragment. So here the fragment is created. Now here I am going to add the needed user interface for the fragment. So here I add the needed user interface for the home fragment. Here I place 4 buttons. First one for add new user, second one for view the users, third one for delete a particular user, and final one is for update a user. So this is the components for home fragment. Now we need to add this home fragment to the main activity. So now we can close these files. Now open main activity. First we need to place a container for fragments inside the main activity layout file. So open activity main.xml. Now select layouts and drag a frame layout. Now specify the constraints. Here I specify constraints on all sides. Okay, now specify an ID for the frame layout. Here I name it as fragment container. So this is the container for fragment inside activity main.xml with ID fragment container. So now we can add the first fragment to the fragment container. So go to main activity. First here I am going to create some variable. It is fragment manager. I name it as fragment manager. Now we can initialize that variable. So fragment manager equal to get support fragment manager. Okay, so now here I am going to add the first fragment to the main activity. So first check the condition if find the view by id r.id dot fragment container not equal to null. Now here check the second condition, that means if the activity resume its state, so in that case saved instance state not equal to null. In that situation simply return. Now here I am going to add the fragment to the container. So fragment manager dot begin transaction. Specify the container. Here it is fragment container. Now specify the fragment. It is home fragment. Now commit the transaction. So this will add the home fragment to the main activity. So now test the application. So now here the application available on the virtual device. So inside main activity we place the home fragment. So when user click the add user button, we need to add the user information to the database. So for adding a new user, here I am going to create another fragment. So create another fragment. Here I name it as add user fragment. So now the fragment is created. Now here I am going to add the user interface for add the information of the user to the database. So here I add the needed user interface for adding a new user to the database. Here I add 3 edit text, user ID, name and email, and here we have a save button. So this is the first edit text, user ID with the ID txt user ID. This is for name txt name, this is for email txt email, and we have a button with ID bn save user. Okay, so when user click the add user button on the home fragment. So when user click the add user button on the home fragment, we have to display the add user fragment. So that is the next thing. So now we can close all these things. Now open the home fragment. So here we need to add some variables. So before going to do that, we can open the layout for the home fragment. So this is the home fragment. This is the first button, add user button with ID bn add user. So first here I create some view object and return that view from this method. Okay, so now create some variables for button bn add user. Okay, now we can initialize that variable bn add user equal to view dot find view by id or dot id dot bn add user, that is the id of the button. Okay, now for this fragment here I am going to implement an interface called on click listener. Now we need to implement one method, the on click method. So here we implement the on click method. So now we can register the listener for the button. So bn add user dot set on click listener into this. Okay, so here we can check which button is actually clicked by the user. So for that here I start a switch case statement. So view dot get id. Now specify the first case if r dot id dot bn add user. In that case we need to display the add user fragment. So we can call the variable main activity fragment manager dot begin transaction. Okay, here we are going to replace the fragment. So call the replace method r dot id dot fragment container. Now specify the fragment name. Here the fragment is add user fragment. Also we need to add this transaction to the backstack. So add it to backstack into null, and finally we can commit the transaction. Okay. Now we can break the case. So break it. Okay, so now we can check it. Okay, now here the application available on this virtual device. If I click the add user button, it will open the fragment called add user. So from this fragment we can add information to the database. So now we can close all these things, close all. Now we can open the add user fragment. We can open the corresponding layout fragment add user. So here we have 3 edit text and 1 button. So here we need to declare the needed variables. So here I initialize all the needed variable. Here I create 3 edit text variable, user ID, username, user email. Here create a variable for button, and here I initialize all that variables. So now we need to create some click listener for the button. So bn save dot set on click listener. So now we need to get the information from the user interface. So here get the user information from the edit text. Get the user ID into this integer variable called user ID. It is an integer, and we get the username from the edit text, and here is the user email. So now we can add this information into the database. For that, just open main activity. So here I am going to create some variables, public static. Here our database class is my app database. Create an object for that one, my app database. Now here I am going to initialize that variable. So my app database equal to room dot, you have to call this method database builder. So first parameter is the context, get application context. Second one is the database class name. Here it is, myappdatabase.class. And third parameter is the database name. Here I name it as user db. And finally, you need to call the method build. Okay, so by using this object, we can perform the database transactions. Now go to the add user fragment.java. So from here, we can perform the data insertion. So first here I'm going to create an object of the entity class. So user equal to new user. Now add the information to this object. So user dot set id, user id, user dot set name, it is user name. Now email, user dot set email, it is email, user email. Okay, so now we can save this information into database. So main activity dot myapp database and get the data access object. So we can call this method my data access object. By using that object, we can call this method add user and pass the object user. So this will put information into the database. So now display an information to the user. User added successfully. In the short, now display the toast. Okay, so after the database insertion, we can clear the edit text. So user id dot set text into null, username dot set text null, user email dot set text into null. Okay, so now we can test the application. Okay, run the application. Now the application available on this virtual device. Now try to add a new user. Specify a user ID. Now specify name of the user. Now specify email. Okay, so now I'm going to save this information, but here this app is going to crash. I will show you what is the reason. Now try to save. So here the app is crashed because we can check the logcat window. So here we have an error called I will read that exception, cannot access database on the main thread since it may potentially lock the UI for a long period of time. That means by default the room database does not allow to access the database operation on the main thread. So here I try to perform the data write operation on the main thread, that is not allowed by the room database. You have to use other API like AsyncTask or RX Android to save information, to run the database operation on a separate background thread. So here the app crashes because I try to perform the database operation on the main thread. That is not a good programming practice. So for training purpose, now here I am going to allow the database operation on the main thread. For that, here you need to call one method on the database builder object. So here you just call this method allow main thread queries. This will allow database operation on the main thread. Now we can test the application again. I run it again. Now try to add a new user. Specify the user ID into 121. Specify name of the user into Pravesh. Now specify email pravesh123@apc.com. Okay, now save the information. So now here it shows we successfully add the information to the database. So this is how we put information into the room database in Android. In the next episode, here I am going to show you how to read information from the database.